That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and today I am very happy to be joined by Hannah Spier. You might recognize her as Psychobabble with Spier over on Substack, and that's where I came across her work, and she was very kind enough. I came across her stuff, read a bunch of it, and then reached out to her, and she was kind enough to come on this Strangers podcast and talk with me. And I think probably one of the things that stood out is you describe yourself as a anti-feminist psychiatrist. What does that mean to you? I guess.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Lou. I'm happy to be here with you all and share my work. So I call myself the anti-feminist psychiatrist, although that, is a little bit, might be a bit alienating to some. But I think that it's gotten to the point where we just have to dispense of this term feminism altogether. Because it has caused so much damage, and I've seen this in the therapy room. We're in the middle of a mental health crisis, and I lay a lot of that at the feet of feminism directly. So the more I started seeing things through that lens, I just said, okay, we have to, we really have to identify the real root of the cause, the real mechanism with which women get mentally unwell, and then by extension, the men in their lives and their children. It's a real pathogen that we have to name, we have to diagnose correctly, we have to understand the mechanism. And so that's why I really openly started calling myself the anti-feminist psychiatrist.
One of the things that I've come across recently are people pointing out that it seems like psychiatry or psychotherapy seems to attract a lot of people who are, for lack of a better word, fucked up. Where it's like they attract people who are kind of battling their own mental illnesses, and then they come to this field where they're supposed to be helping other people with mental illness, and it just seems like kind of a um, not a great idea if you look at it like in
Yeah,
total.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I saw that a lot in the hospital, in the different psychiatric hospitals I worked at, and in the clinics, where I would look over, because I would very often be in with psychologists, female psychologists, in there. I'd be supervising, or I'd be the medical coordinator, all the intakes. I'd have to be there, and they'd sit there with their scars on their arms, and then I'd catch them crying in the hallways hysterically in between sessions, and I'd just see that their lives were not in order, and they'd gone into the field probably for the wrong reasons. We all want to be sort of the rescuer, and we need to feel needed and appreciated. That's fine. That's why a lot of us go into the medical field as well. But they sort of confuse mental health with becoming mentally well themselves. They have some problems that they need to figure out. And so, yeah, I think a lot of these women shouldn't be there at all. We have now more than 80% of the psychological community is female,
Wow.
and that has great consequences. Yeah.
What was there like a certain time when the switch happened? I mean, was there a time where most psychologists, psychiatrists were men, and then it eventually tapered off and women took over?
Yeah, in the 90s it switched. It switched. But that's true for all of the liberal arts degrees. It just switched around that time. The same happened in psychology. And you know, it colors the way that they do therapy, that they when they how they interpret what they read. And I just see that there are consequences for men when men go to mental health therapy, that women are used to dealing with women, and they're used to dealing with themselves and their friends, and they don't give men the appropriate therapy that they need to get better.
So yeah, what are sort of the elements of kind of more of this feministic approach to therapy? What are those certain markers of that make the therapist now like kind of more coming from a feminist viewpoint, I guess.
Well, they all believe in that traditional gender roles are bad, that they believe in the patriarchy, that they automatically assume that men oppress women. They will invariably take the wife's side. It doesn't matter if it's the wife or the husband who's in therapy. I've seen this happen when we're sitting in these groups. Most clinics have this where once a week you'll sit with all the therapists together and you'll give advice and you'll talk through your cases. And I noticed that in the way that they're approaching, the way that they're talking about men and women, that they'll never give men the benefit of the doubt. They'll always assume that, if he's late home from work, it's because he's chatting with his pals, like he's not starving and rushing to get home at the earliest convenience. They'll just assume that the woman does the most at home. They won't ask. Like once, I can give you a concrete example.
Yeah.
Once I was sitting in one of these groups, and another therapist was talking about her. She had a wife in therapy, and she was talking about the how she was suffering and doing a lot of the domestic chores. Sort of the usual. This goes on in every couple, and the wife wasn't working as much as the husband, which is also very common, and that they had kids. And then I asked a question, what is the financial difference between their salaries? What is the husband making? What's the difference? And the room got silent. That was just how dare I ask such a thing? Like the salary difference should be relevant, because no matter the difference, he should be doing as much in the house as her. And this was specifically about getting up in the night and going to the kids. And so I was trying to sort of say, maybe there's another way that we can look at this, because if she's feeling resentful, which is such a common problem, and that the differences in household, that usually it originates in resentment and it develops resentment. And the antidote to that is to encourage understanding. It's to encourage sympathy and to give the benefit of the doubt. And that was just not on the table for this husband who was never even in the room. So those sort of situations just got me thinking that of course no one's getting better. And I started Psychobabble because it frustrated me how long people are stuck in therapy, how many patients we're not getting to, and the period of time they spend in therapy. People are in therapy for years, and that shouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, when I'm just full disclosure, I'm technically in therapy. I see my therapist like once a month. We used to do like a weekly thing a while back, and I think probably for like maybe the past like year or two, I'm just kind of checking in like once a month, um there was a time when I was going like every week. My therapist is a male, which is like a rare a rare
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Mhm.
but hearing about people who would go to therapy like multiple times a week, like some people like 5 days a week. For one, I'm like, I have no idea how you get the money to do that.
Yeah.
It seems like you almost have to be really wealthy to be mentally mentally ill at some point. Um, but I think there was a time with the same therapist where I didn't see him for a couple of years. Like I was like, "Hey, I'm doing good. I'm doing fine." We separated, and then when I came, there were some life changes, and I wanted to talk about and try to figure out. Came back to him. But I think like, I mean, if I felt like I was just getting worse in therapy, I would probably try to rethink therapy completely, you know? Like, it was just like, why would I keep going to something if I'm not actually, getting benefits from it, you know?
Right, and you also have to be careful that you're not developing a pseudo friendship with the
Mm.
therapist, right? Because it's his at the end, it is his job, and, always have to ask the question, like, what are they getting out of it?
Yeah.
Because very, very often that is, it is something.
Yeah, I have to say, as a as a comedian and an entertainer, I do sometimes find myself entertaining my therapist.
Mm,
I you know, I, laughter is there is there, and, me recounting stuff, recounting funny stories or things that have happened. I'm not saying that, he wants me as a patient because he's not getting enough,
yeah,
there's not enough good shows on Netflix, but, um, for me, I think one of the things that I'm not necessarily like, uh it's not like it's I'm confronting or anything like that. It's just there's a thing that happens in therapy where, like, something will happen in your life, maybe something recently, it has an effect on you, right? And then days or weeks will pass, and then you go to therapy, and now it's like, "Ugh, I gotta bring this up. Like, I have to talk about this," you know? And
mhm,
sometimes I think it's a lot better and healthier just to kinda get over shit rather than just go back and let's unpack it and see how this somehow relates to my father not doing this thing for me when I was 8 years old, or this relationship I have with an estranged brother. And, after a while, it sort of seems like I'm kind of, building kind of the psychology of almost
yes,
like a fictional character, like trying to imbue every single, thing that happens in life and your response to it with sort of these past traumas, you know?
right. But you should, um, there are some red flags. So, because this
Mm.
is a very common question that I get. How long should I be in therapy, and how
Yeah,
do I
yeah.
know if it's working? If it's g Because it's sort of like an unprovable hypothesis, because every patient is different and so on. Uh, but if your therapist is not at some point suggesting that you might do 2 weeks
Right.
in between sessions rather than 1 week, for example, and say, "Let's see how you do until next month,"
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
see. There are also some misconceptions that I would say most therapists work on, and that is this idea of there's some memory to unlock. There's
Right.
some event to unlock, whether you remember it or not. And that is just false. That is, something Freudian that we have, disproven quite a long time ago, but people still believe and therapists are not as good as at their craft anymore, so they continue, to let patients believe that there's this event that they might not remember hidden in a black box, and you just need to open it, and it's not that's also then you are doomed to spend quite a bit of time in therapy. The other thing is that, even if it's a male therapist, many of them are very effeminate. And, if you are, you are, from what I see now, you are not very effeminate. And so you don't you shouldn't be receiving therapy like a woman.
Right.
Right? Women like to sit across each other and talk for hours. That makes us feel better. With men, sitting across from a man, that triggers you. It's, if you think about contact sports like hockey, man to man, face to face, that triggers aggression.
Mhm.
So you should be going for walks, you should be doing something, sitting in a car, for example. That'll get a man to talk about everything in 3 seconds. Most men, they talk very well in the
Well,
car
I didn't
because
re
you're not sitting face to face.
that's a really good point. Actually, reminds me of a few years back, I was in my car just in a parking lot. I was going to, pick something up, and a good friend of mine gave me a call, and he was going through some stuff, and I'm just there in the parking lot. I have him on speakerphone, and I'm gonna pat myself on the back. I had some insights into what he was going through that I was like, I don't even know how I knew this. I was so incisive and it was so there, and it was sort of I never realized. Yeah, the car is such like a freeing place where
It
to
is.
express. Yeah.
Another thing that helps, men a lot, and that female therapists usually have no idea about, is that they need to have they heal very well through action, through
Mm,
doing something, building something. I had a man, in therapy who had a family, he was doing it very well. Any onlooker would think, like, "What? Why are you depressed? Why are you anxious? You're doing so you have everything in life." Just sudden onset panic attacks. And I had him start building. He had this old boat that was just standing there from his dad, and he started building it. That really helped him a lot. Like things like that, that you just have to figure out what can you do so that you start. And then, he was building this boat, and he just as the tears started running, he was telling me about it after. And that's then a much better therapy session than whatever we did after.
mm.
But this is sort of knowledge that when so a majority of the psychological community are female and they're feminists, they're not going to offer this kind of treatment to men.
Yeah, from my firsthand experience and knowing, other dudes, the impact that, like, for example, exercise has on your mental health is,
Mhm.
for lack of a better word, ironically insane. It has an insane impact on how it can change you up. Your diet,
Yeah, the
your
lifestyle.
exercise and all that. And I really do think that most people would see a profound, significant positive change in their life if they would exercise. But now I'm thinking
Yeah,
about,
but it's been buried. That's
yeah.
been buried by pharma companies.
Well,
The studies showing it. That's
well,
purposefully buried.
and I wonder, like, how many therapists feel comfortable to say, like, "Hey, you know what? You should lift weights and you should lose weight, and
N
you should."
Not
Yeah.
very many. No, because, they were all taught postmodernist principles, right? That's what took over the universities after the Cultural Revolution, and then they believe that, anything can be explained by an internalized narrative,
Mm,
that you can change any biological reality if you simply tell yourself a different story. So if you want to feel better about yourself, but you're overweight and out of shape, then, it's just about what you tell yourself in the mirror. And if you stand in front of the mirror and you self-affirm enough, then that's gonna help you. Then you can rewrite your own narrative and get better self-esteem, which they also continue talking about, this long ago debunked concept of self-esteem. So you get all these things, it's very
mm.
frustrating, but they'll still offer that kind of therapy. And yeah, like you said, like you so rightly say, men usually have no problem hearing that. Hey, you should lift some weights. You should change your life. Why are you eating that crap?
Yeah, the amount of guys who would admit, like, "Yeah, I'm a fat fuck, and I drink too much, and probably be my life would be better if I wasn't a fat fuck who drank too much."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, you talk like that to each other, and yeah,
right, right.
it's much better than therapy.
Yeah, so, you got me thinking about, just in regards to therapy, it's like when you have things like, say, like, the body positivity movement, where this
Mm,
idea of, fat acceptance, right? Um, you have that, and then you also playing with things like when it comes to therapy, when it comes to just how, like, kind of mental illness is now looked upon now, where, you know, there are people who are kind of like applauded for having a mental illness. It's like, "Yay, I'm bipolar," or "Yay, I have OCD," or something that you had pointed to on your Substack. I'm neurodivergent. And which I'll let you get into, but it's sort of like if I had it's kind of like if I broke my leg, right? And everybody was telling me that it's really good that you have a broken leg. Then it's sort of like, well, should I be healing my broken leg, or should I be, leaning into the fact that I have a broken leg? Like, I just, what impact does that have on, therapy itself when it's sort of like, wait, you're applauding me for being mentally ill? How are we gonna should we even try to fix this or just lean into it?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's an analogy that I usually use. If you have a toothache and you go to your dentist and you say, you just need to tell yourself a different story. You're gonna go to someone else, right? And that's what they do. No, your narrative is wrong. You have to tell yourself something else. But women, we like to affirm each other, and that's what therapy has become. Just women sitting there and thinking, "No, you're okay and you're good," and we usually have such a strong need for belonging and being somebody, and mental disorders have become that. It's become, now I am somebody.
Mm.
It's a big problem. I point to a lot of these things. Another, um, parallel to that, we have a rise of cluster B pathology, cluster B traits.
Yeah, can you
It's
explain
very
what
much on the rise. Yeah. So the cluster B trait, it comes from this three this model of personality disorders. In the DSM, it's divided into cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. Cluster A being the rather odd and the schizotypal, schizoid, and paranoid. That's the ones who live in a hut in the forest and want nothing to do with the world, and they just want to be left alone with their delusions. Right, the odd ones. And cluster B are the erratic, the dramatic, the narcissists, the psychopaths. So it's 4 disorders. It's borderline personality disorder, which I think everyone knows. It's histrionic, the attention seekers, the need for admiration. It's it's the narcissists. Narcissistic personality disorder is within cluster B. And then you have also the antisocial or the psychopaths. It's a bit interchangeable. Um, and then you have the cluster C, which are the ones who usually attach to these cluster Bs, the avoidant, the dependent personality type. So they usually attract each other. And then so when I say I think cluster B traits are on the rise, it's not that I'm diagnosing everyone with a cluster B personality disorder, but it's a very sort of fluid. You can have exacerbated traits which do run rampant. We see this across species, depending on the environment, depending on genetics, temperament, what you are born with, because 50-60% of your personality traits are hereditary. You've no control. And then it's up to your environment and your parents to try to move that in a good direction. And that's what we're not doing. So we're seeing a higher prevalence of emotional instability, of narcissism. We see it in campus riots. We see people are allowed to have public tantrums in
Mm.
public. So I think everyone's been touched by that. We're seeing a lot of workplace bullying, and we're also seeing a lot of women, because this is overwhelmingly affecting women. So because the way it manifests in men, it's more outward aggression. So we see they get incarcerated, they get prosecuted. We see it in prisons. They have a huge, a high prevalence of antisocial personality disorder in men in prisons. But the female misbehavior, we're not diagnosing, we're not recognizing, because we don't like to morally judge female behavior.
Mm.
That is what this is. And we see that they go to the clinics and they say, they come with, and I've had this, I've seen it happen. They come with ready filled out questionnaires saying, I have this, I have ADHD, I have Asperger's. My kid was just diagnosed with Asperger's or autism. And so therefore, because it's hereditary, I must have it too. And it's narcissistic because it's seeking unearned privilege and status. And there is status in victimhood now. And if you're not otherwise marginalized, right? If you're not Black, if you're not, any of these groups that we put on a pedestal, this is an this is then an easy grab, right? I have a mental
Mm.
disorder. I am also marginalized. I'm also a victim. And then there's this competition of who's the best victim. That's the narcissism. I am the best at being small. Look at me. Look at me. They're filming themselves. We see it all over TikTok. They're filming themselves saying, "Look, I'm the best victim. I'm the most fragile." And they're crying in front of the camera. That's the the histrionic trait. And so that's why I like to call it, this cluster B condition, because it's not that everyone fits into a neat box. It's that you have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You have some narcissism, you have some histrionicism, you have some of the emotionally unstable. And so this is what antisocial looks like in women, and we refuse to recognize it because of feminism.
Mm.
So that's why I get back to that. I lay a lot of this at the feet of feminism.
Well, I wonder too, obviously, as you say, feminism playing a role. And then I also think there's something too of, when it comes to men or uh, the patriarchy, where men will also make excuses. Like I dated a woman, and it wasn't until it was a very toxic relationship, but it wasn't until we were broken up that a number of my friends started telling me what they really thought of her. And they were
Mm,
like, "Oh, she was a, cunt," and I recounted this one thing that had happened, and my buddy was like, "Yeah, man, she's a bad person." And
mm,
and it was sort of like in the moment, I guess, I don't know, I was there, and, what would you call it? Pussy whipped, I guess, just sort of like making excuses. Well, how could she be? She's not a big, violent, burly guy, so how can what she's doing be all that bad? Or maybe I'm
mm.
messed up because look, I'm much bigger than she is. So, her, scratching my neck or, getting into like a physical altercation with me. It's okay because I'm the, I'm larger and able to defend myself if needed. And that's sort of like,
Right.
I think when you bring the two together, there's going to be problems. You see this all the time with, uh, you see it where, you'll have like a male serial killer in prison, and then he'll get all these women who are big fans of his and like want to like have his babies and stuff. And then
Right. That's
you see
cluster B.
cluster
Cluster B.
B. And then
Yeah.
you'll see another side, the other side of that where there's like, mug shots of women criminals, but they're all pretty. And like guys will be like, okay, I could change her, or, I'll put
Right.
up with it because she's so, she's so good
There's a
looking.
lot of that. But also, I just see men are so desperate for companionship now.
Uh,
They are with these dating apps, women have at any given moment a buffet of men. They can
oh
just
yeah.
swipe. We see it from the data from the dating apps. We're seeing this happen. They get an sort of an inflated sense of worth. So we're feeding the narcissism. They have you see it in the list of demands that they have on men. I
Right.
mean, I just see young men, they're I mean, you guys don't stand a chance. It's just all you want is just like, "Just wanna live my life with a woman." That's all men really want. They want to be admired and loved by a woman. And, just very, at a disadvantaged, in society now,
Well,
I think.
yeah, with the dating apps, I know the big thing is,
Yeah.
women not wanting to be with a guy unless he's 6 feet tall. And
Exactly, and 500,000 a year, and
yeah, yeah.
just
Well,
ridiculous.
I was thinking, just on the height thing, like, I may have been, like, one of the few guys who didn't lie about his height on dating apps. Like, I'm legitimately 5'10". Like, I'm not
Yeah,
5'8" pretending I'm 5'10". I am
yeah,
5'10". And I'm just, like, to not to toot my own horn, but I did very well on dating apps. I had a lot of fun. I think in part because I was looking to play, I was looking to,
yeah.
uh, play around, and, that eventually that's where I met my wife, and she was so great that I was like, "Okay, I'm done. So I think I'm also so far removed from like what dating is like now that I guess it's hard for
Yeah.
me to even understand because I had so much fun and like I legitimately enjoy women, you know? So now I just see what looks like a lot of guys who they seem like they're alienated, they're not um, they're not attracting women, and they're getting really bitter and angry, and that bitterness isn't helping them. If you're a bitter,
It's not,
angry
but
dude,
it's
it's not gonna help.
understandable.
Yeah,
I understand it very well. I understand it because what are they supposed to do? And then when they do get married, she has all the power. You see it again and again. She can initiate divorce whenever she wants, and she knows she'll get alimony, she'll get the kids. I understand that it's really a problem that we have to recognize, what we're doing to young men. They're not, uh, they're not, um, the we're letting women dominate them in universities. We're letting women take over. We're having all these quotas for women. I'm really afraid for my 2 boys. I'm very afraid. And then there's the issue of consent and the whole fake rape crisis. There are a lot I have a hard time, judging men's behavior, and I get very upset, when they keep harping on about the manosphere and all that. I mean, who even is that, you know?
yeah.
Men just want encouragement. They just want, and if you go into these manosphere videos, what do you see? You see just encouragement to work out and become your better self, and just all they want is encouragement. Be a man, and this the women just will demand, "Accept me the way I am." He shouldn't want me to change. If he wants me to change, those feelings belong to him. He should be putting that on me. Uh, but we don't like to talk about what you just said, that we will always pick out the tallest guy in the group. We'll always choose someone who's better educated than us, and who makes more money than us. At the same time, how is that supposed to happen when we're getting all the university degrees?
I was just thinking there's that quote, attributed to Marilyn Monroe. It's something like, "If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." And it's like, there's no way a
Oh, I
man
see it
could say
all the
that.
time.
There's
Oh
no
my
way a
god, I
man
see
could
it
say
all the
that.
time. I have so many friends who reposting that, and it just, it makes my skin crawl. Like, you should try not to be at your worst.
Yeah. Well,
That's it, and
I mean, to be fair, at Marilyn Monroe's worst, she OD'd on drugs and passed away. I mean, so that's definitely, a tough one for sure.
and women aren't, we aren't admitting how poorly we're doing. We only want more when women are doing badly, we immediately blame society. We immediately put it on men. If
Mhm.
men will just step up, and I see them doing nothing else. They're desperate to step up, if they have the chance, but they're not given the chances. And we're talking about, I just saw this panel on Diary of CEO with Erica Komisar and Louise Perry and the guilty feminist, and they're talking about how awful women are doing, poor women, and you know again, the list of demands on men. Men have to do this and men have to do that. But no accountability on women. No one will ask, "Hey, what is a woman's duties? What makes a good mother?" We've no problem listing what makes a good father. We can talk about that right now. What's a good father? What's a bad father? No one will bat an eyelash. But if you ask, like, "What's a good mother?" Any mother's a good mother. Any mother's good enough.
Mhm.
And it's just I could go on and on, but this
Yeah.
is, that's really what frustrates, and I think it's making us, very ill. We don't know what's expected of us, and we also don't then know when we're doing a good job. So we're always asking, Is this right? Is that right? We have all the information. We go on to all these blogs, and every time there are 100 different ways to do something, and, we're not guided properly anymore. We're not guiding young women anymore. What should I be doing with my life? And women need to the happiest women are the ones who are from the beginning family-oriented, who start thinking family-oriented when they're teenagers and make decisions based on that. Because if you hit your 30s and you have only focused on your career, suddenly that doesn't mean anything anymore because I'm sorry, that
Mm.
is what's gonna happen.
Do you have a
And
kettle? Do
you
you have a kettle on? Do you have a
Yeah,
just
it's the water in the pipes.
Oh, okay, I thought you were
Yes.
making a tea. Uh,
No, 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 sorry. That's just gonna happen. But then if women don't set their lives up properly according to what they're gonna want in their 30s, well, we're gonna see a lot of psychopathology, and that is what we're doing. We see I've seen a lot of women in their 20s, they're coming in with health and related anxieties and panic attacks because they're trying to get through degrees they have no capacity to finish. And then women in their 30s who are burnt out or depressed because they haven't set their lives up for what they're going to want in their 30s, which is family invariably. There's a very small subset of women for whom motherhood is never going to speak to them. They're never going to want that, and that's okay. But it's very few women. They have a very specific personality type. I'm sorry, and that's happening again. Um, and we're telling young women, girls, that this group is much bigger than it is. You
mhm,
follow? We're
yes.
telling girls that it's just as likely you're not gonna wanna have kids, and it's a blatant lie, it's a feminist lie. It's very, very, very likely that if you get into your 30s, you're gonna want a family. You're gonna want to have the option to step back. You're gonna want to have a man who can, earn when you don't want to earn. You're gonna want a traditional life, so don't settle for someone who just wants to go climbing. Or settle for I'm sorry I used that word, I don't like it, but, don't choose a mate, who doesn't want a traditional lifestyle, because that in the end is what you're gonna want.
Mhm,
And people who settle in these egalitarian, couples, they have a much higher divorce rate, and the women end up very unhappy. They end up complaining about things like mental load, and he's not doing his fair share, and, it's just a lot of maternal guilt.
mhm. Something
Yeah.
that I find because I spend a lot of time on X where it could be a lot of fun. You see a lot of people like, giving relationship advice who aren't in relationships. That people giving marriage advice who aren't married, who are giving advice about how to find a mate, who have been single their whole
Yeah.
life. The do's and do nots and uh, if anyone out there is looking for a great follow, it's Wilfred Riley, who's a friend of mine. He's been on my podcast before, and he often calls out a lot of this, a lot of this bullshit, like the idea that a man in a relationship shouldn't expect his wife to have sex with him.
Yeah.
Like the idea that you go into a long term committed monogamous relationship and you don't owe each other physical pleasure is insane, you know? But then you'll have people who are, making this argument, she doesn't owe you, blah, blah, blah." And it's like, well, we're talking about kind of different things than, I think there should be the understanding that you're going to be making love with your partner, you know? So
Yeah. Well, we do tend to excuse, female adultery to a
Oh,
much
really?
if you look at yeah, but you just look at anything that you watched, movies, TVs. Whenever a woman cheats, it's because she's unsatisfied and she's just unhappy, and they explain it. They explain it so that in the end, you end up having sympathy for her. But when a man does it, he's a narcissist and a psychopath. And this
Or
we're trained to excuse bad female behavior.
or he's Don Draper, which mean from, Mad Men, in which case
Oh,
it's
don't
okay
get me started.
because he's so
It's
good looking.
yeah, but this is also a very Mad Men is responsible for very tilted, very, very wrong view of the 60s. Women were much happier then. They were. But it's because we've fed this is how bored housewives, this is how they treated women then, so we needed second wave feminism.
Mm.
Um,
Or the idea that somehow, every housewife was medicated in the 60s, and it's like, well, I mean, what are the rates
yeah,
today of women on medication, you know?
and exactly. They did tend to they did use different psychiatric medications than we use today, it's, now we would call them horse tranquilizers. It's, but it didn't fall so what we're given a view of very privileged suburban wives who were bored because they just got, washing machines and they just got all this equipment that they used to spend a lot of time on, and so that didn't go through a development it probably should.
Mhm,
And so now I think young women should be told about all these different things they can do next to being as side gigs, next to being a mother, because there's so many ways you can try to earn money. But if you're gonna go for that law degree, if you're gonna become a doctor, those options are very limited, and so that's what I mean by starting to tell girls that you should start from a family-oriented perspective. Because but when they're going for those degrees in their 20s, they think that they're always going to feel the way they feel in the moment. And they're on this dopamine high, achievement after achievement. Look, I'm doing so great. I have all this ambition. And they think that they can fill their unmet emotional needs with this ambition. And that's all well and good until you're 30. And then suddenly those achievements mean nothing anymore. You're not getting that dopamine kick
mm,
anymore because your goalposts has shifted. And so because we're not being honest with girls about this shift, we're not being honest about what's gonna happen to them, how they're gonna feel, and parents are overwhelmingly telling girls that, make sure you're financially independent first, and we have surveys telling us what parents are saying to their kids. It's that, make sure you have a career first, and so they end up in their 30s childless and unhappy, much because of that, because we're not being honest with them. And there are ways that you can be a mother full time while contributing financially and having your intellectual stimulus next to that.
mhm. Well,
Yeah.
where are you from originally? Where were you born? So
I'm born in Norway, so
in
I'm
Norway.
a Norwegian born and raised, and now I'm in Switzerland.
Now you're in Switzerland. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
because I was wondering, the work that you do, do you do work in the States? Because is there like a difference between, say, Norway and Switzerland and the US with how, psychiatry is handled, or is it kind of
It's
universal to
very
what's happening?
intertrained. Yeah, it's very universal, but we just have a different, diagnostic classification system. So in Europe, you'll use the ICD, the International Classification System, and then, in the US, the DSM, but everything I talk about is always, it's always the DSM, it's always the way that it works in the US because my audience is American.
Mhm. Well, when you were,
So
when you were doing, inpatient stuff, in hospitals. So
yeah.
I had a guest years ago, Dr. Anthony Daniels, who goes by
Oh, he's amazing.
Theodore Dalrymple.
He's the
Yeah.
godfather of psychobabble. He's the one that took that term from psychobabble.
Oh, you did? Oh,
He's a hero of mine. Yeah, he was the first one. I read him, and I thought that's exactly it. I just had a kid. I just become completely disillusioned with psychiatry, and I read Theodore Dalrymple, and I was just like, "Yes, that's exactly the problem."
mm.
So he's a hero.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, he's lived such an incredible life, and he writes often about, politics and culture. But my favorite stuff is when he shares stories of his as a doctor in a psychiatric hospital in England. And yeah, well, one of the things that one of the stories that always strikes me, uh, is the one he talks about how he had this one patient uh, who was abusive to his wife, right? Beating her up all the time. And the wife was sort of making excuses for him. And uh, Dalrymple, asked, he's like, well, do you think he'd hit you if I were in the room? And she said, oh, no, he wouldn't. And it's like, well, there you go. You know, suddenly this guy who, can't control himself, who is just responding to whatever stimulus that the wife is providing. The way to get in the way to stop him is to have another man in the room, or, in this case, it's how to handle, criminals. It's like, yeah, lock them away and punish them for their terrible behavior. Don't let them out so they can go
Yeah.
and do more, more damage. So I really
Yeah, he also
appreciate
says
that.
that they confuse passion for love because
Mm,
they think, he wouldn't hit me if he didn't feel so strongly about me.
right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Which is just like a really scary, scary thing to think about. Um, can we talk about neurodivergence? Um, the amount of people who say, "Well, I'm somewhere on the spectrum," and it's like, nah, maybe you're just an asshole. Maybe you're not necessarily on the spectrum. Uh, so you have a one of your recent posts. It's neurodivergence is a costume worn by narcissists. So maybe you could explain
Yeah,
that
that's
a little bit.
yeah, yeah. So I mentioned before how the cluster B types will come and ask for diagnoses to become someone because then you are someone special. So
Mm,
they're likely to do this, but the problem is much deeper. It's just being utilized now by them. But this is for so the autism diagnosis is just one of the victims of this inflated diagnostic system that we now have. I mean, the DSM used to be 100 something diagnoses. Now it's well over 300. And so, it used to be that autism was it was a very disabling disorder. It was usually very low IQ people with cognitive and verbal impairments. So they couldn't speak properly. They had repetitive movements that they had huge problems controlling, and very very oversensitive to any kind of stimuli. And they had then had reactions that they were really unable to control because of developmental struggles. And then through all the revisions we've had of the DSM from the 80s until now, every time they revise it, they include something else. They make the diagnostic label bigger. So then
mm,
they'll include, it used to be that it was something they had to diagnose early, and they could also see it early on, these developmental impairments. And then they shift the age. Then they say, okay, well, it was within 3 years. It's no longer infantile autism, but autism spectrum disorder, where they then also include Asperger's and high functioning. And so as time went on, they made this diagnostic label bigger and bigger, and then obviously then you can include more and more people. Then they start talking about that you can mask symptoms, and that it's more prevalent among women than we think because women will mask their symptoms. But if you look at videos uh, from back then of autistic children, there was no there was no masking for them. They were so cognitively impaired. It wasn't about a switch or I'm going to do this now. And so now it's really a lot of misbehavior is cloaked with this label. And then, so not to make a moral judgment, this term neurodivergence came.
mm.
because you don't wanna be, "Oh, just," it's just, uh, because it's not something really that you can treat. You can manage autism, you can learn to function, and I've had them in therapy as well, where you just have to sort of situation by situation, and it's about exposure rather than what you do now, which is try to seclude them and avoid triggers. It's
Mm,
more about exposure to triggers and learning to deal with it as much as you can. And so now it's become this catch-all. So because you put this neurodivergence, what is the opposite of that? It's neurotypical. And that's then becoming um, then the neurotypical kids in school, well, they're just gonna have to deal with all of the neurodivergent kids because they all have to be in the same classroom together. Why? Because there are now so many that we don't have money anymore. We don't have proper funding to give those who need special ed.
mm,
They should be separated. They should have special treatment. But when obviously, and this is what irks me so much, because these were the patients that we should be protecting. We should be making sure that they get the funding and the treatment that they need. And that it's very expensive. It's very expensive to manage these disorders. And if you have, and now they're saying the prevalence is like 1 in 30. Well, that's one kid almost in every class.
yeah,
So then, of course, it gets very watered down, and we are not, s something that we're supposed to be compassionate. But then you really have to start asking, to whom? For whom should we have this compassion? It's both. It's the neurotypical kids who have to sort of bear being spit on and things thrown at. Well, you can't say anything. It's an autist,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you
and
know?
and you and I were talking too. We both have you know, children, boys, the same age, and yeah, uh, one thing that I'm definitely not going to put up with as my kids go to school is any of that bullshit. Because
Yeah,
I have my mother-in-law. She works with special needs kids, and my God, like, some of them are really violent. And it's not like
yeah,
my
yeah,
mother-in-law's, a woman in her 60s. I mean, she's about ready to retire. And, the prospect of, some of these kids are big and strong and they're
yeah,
violent.
yeah, yeah.
And, they hit the teachers and all that.
And
And it's just
yeah.
not cool. Not all right.
They need special attention.
Yeah.
It's not a label that you should give to people who want to be special, and that's where these cluster B, types come in, because they have um, no sense of, they have very little empathy, right? That is the narcissism aspect. They have very shallow, they have very little emotional depth. So it's all about what can I get, and what about me? They feel things very acutely, and they need to satisfy that need immediately, like a toddler. That is why cluster B is it's a disorder of emotional regulation. They never learn to properly emotionally regulate, so they will, in many aspects, still be like toddlers.
Mm,
And this is, what can I get to satisfy this emotional instability that I'm feeling right now? And they will not be made to care about those who are really suffering from this. And that's those kids,
yeah.
the real autists who now have to sit in these big classrooms, right? And, yeah, so it's a big is and we have the same problem with the trauma diagnosis, had also become very inflated. They had the same problem through every revision of the DSM. The trauma diagnosis gets bigger and encompasses a bigger group of people, and we are then unable to gatekeep, from cluster B types. That is what we need to do. We have to make sure that it's not preyed upon by psychopaths, by antisocial women. And it is exactly what's happening now.
Wow. Well, Hannah, I just want to tell all my fans out there who are cluster B psychotic women, uh, keep watching my show. I don't know what the breakdown is, but if you guys are out there, let me know what you think about this. Hannah, I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
You gotta check out Hannah's stuff over at Psychobabble with Spier over on Substack, and I'll have links and all that in the description. Thank you so much for this. I'm going to end the recording right now.
Thank you so much, Lou.